Well, welcome to the another installment of For the Living of These Days, Lamentation edition. So as someone shared with me this week, that they were heart sore and soul sick. Heart sore and soul sick. They were lamenting their lamentation at all the unfolding in the lives of our siblings and in our streets and our brothers and sisters of color, and our white communities, all navigating this pain. So ruminating on lamentation and the role of lamentation, of crying out, of just living in the trauma and the pain of another, to listen, truly listen, and be with, and also to get in touch with our own cry, our own lament. So in pondering that, have we lost the ability to lament, or we have underestimated the power of lament, to cry, to feel deeply the trauma and wound? Is the violence erupting in our streets, in our lives, a product of our inability to listen to the lamentation of others? Truly listen. To listen to the lamentation, to denial of our own need to lament. So again, I ask that question, because lamentation is a cry that is heard, or that is hoped for, and hoped in prophetic lament. And I thank Mary Beth Ingram for reminding me that I had this on my shelf. But staying with the book is titled Prophetic Lament, A Call for Justice in Troubled Times. It's by Sung-Chan Rah. And he relates our avoidance of lament in this book to a culture of triumphalism. In our North American culture, we live success, we live celebration, we want to be healthy, wealthy, and wise, he says. To live celebrity, we want the trumpets sounding, he says. And because we focus on triumph, there is little room for lament. Instead, we focus on psalms of wisdom and praise and thanksgiving and worship. And that is all wonderful, good, and biblical. But the not so wonderful lament is also a part of our scriptures and has a place in our lives today. And so I love April Yamasaki's take on this book, and I'll just encapsulate it. 6 reasons why we lament. 1, lament acknowledges the reality of suffering. Lament in the Bible is a liturgical response to the reality of suffering and engages God in the context of pain and trouble. The hope of lament is that God would respond to human suffering that is wholeheartedly communicated through lament. Number 2, lament acknowledges the complexities of life. The evangelical culture, as Ra writes out of, but I think other spiritual cultures, moves too quickly to praise from lament. We do not hear from all the voices in North American context. Instead, we opt for quick and easy answers to complex issues. We want to move on to the happier message of success and triumph and cover up the message of those who suffer, he writes. 3, lament corrects the overemphasis of triumphalism. Christology needs to be shaped as much by lament as by praise, he writes. Otherwise, the theology of celebration overwhelms the theology of suffering, and we have an imbalance and dysfunction. We must seek to be the church that integrates the theology of suffering with the theology of celebration. We must seek to be the church that engages in both praise and lament. We must seek to be the church that embodies the full narrative of Christ in his suffering and in his triumph. 4, lament is an act of protest. Lament is an act of protest as the lamenter is allowed to express his indignation and even outrage about the experience of suffering. The lamenter talks back to God and ultimately petitions God for help in the midst of pain. The one who laments can call out to God for help. And in the outcry, there is the hope and even the manifestation of praise. 5, lament leads to petition and praise. Lament serves the purpose of providing a necessary step toward praise. However, in a culture context that upholds triumph and victory, but fails to encourage and engage with suffering, praise replaces lament. We live in denial. We skip the important step of lament and other supplication in a contextual vacuum, he writes. And 6, lament and praise go hand in hand. To only have a theology of celebration at the cost of a theology of suffering is incomplete, he writes. The intersection of the two threads provides the opportunity to engage in the fullness of the gospel message. And I add from page 84 in his book. And he's speaking of Jeremiah's lamentations as Jeremiah laments over Judah and Israel. The city lament draws Yahweh's attention to the very real suffering of the city. Lamentations speak to a present reality rather than a future dream or a symbolic abstraction. Lamentations as a city lament follows the features of an ancient Near Eastern city lament in detailing the comprehensive destruction of the city. Much like the funeral dirge, those who lament the destruction of the city are forced to deal with the reality of suffering. The city lament is not an occasion to dream of a better future for the city. It's a time to recognize the concrete and material realities of the city. So the city lament, as expressed in Lamentation, does not deal with hypotheticals or abstract ideals. It deals with the destroyed city that smolders before them. This is a national lament, and even in light of what we're seeing, cities smoldering, and it should lead us to the outcry of the poor, of those who live in our urban areas, and which leads us to how we lament for a nation seething and on fire. And so we take time to just cry out and to hear the cries of our brothers and sisters, just to sit with the moment and not to try to give some prophetic future pie in the sky, but to live in the moment and be and sit with and to rage with, and then to walk with into liberation and into God, because ultimately praise must also accompany that lament, as he writes. And so, to close with some scriptural lamentation and prayer, I guess I would ask us to somehow get in touch with our visceral, get in the pain with our own lamentation, coming out of still gathering into this virus. There's so much cry and lamentation now into the recognition of just how deep our racial pain and the visuals. So in that, in Jeremiah chapter 1, in his Lamentations, Jeremiah's Lamentations chapter 1, consisting of 5 poems of lament of Judah and Jerusalem. How lonely sits the city that once was full of people. How like a widow she has become, she that was great among the nations, she that was a princess among the provinces has become a vassal. She weeps bitterly in the night with tears on her cheeks. Among all her lovers, she has no one to comfort her, and all her friends have dealt treacherously with her. They have become her enemies. Judah has gone into exile with suffering and hard servitude, and she lives among the nations and finds no resting place. Her pursuers have all overtaken her in the midst of her distress. To live with those words of lament, and to see that lamentation is permeating our culture, our society, and to sit with that and to hear the trauma of lament of the other. Habakkuk writes, I heard and my heart pounded, my lips quivered at the sound. Decay crept into my bones and my legs trembled, yet I will wait patiently for the day of calamity to come. Though the fig tree does not bud and there are no grapes on the vines, and though the olive crop fails and the fields produce no food, though there are no sheep in the pen and no cattle in the stalls, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will be joyful with God, my Savior. The sovereign Lord is my strength. He makes my feet like the feet of a deer, and he enables me to tread on the heights. In those words, again, it's that lamentation and praise go simultaneously, that we must find the light in the darkness. We must find Christ in the pain, and we must find liberation in the midst of oppression. We don't just sit a Good Friday world. We are resurrection people. And so in our Episcopal journey, we do have those moments of lamentation. We relegate them to a season. More so, we should be striving with death and resurrection every moment. Our psalms of lament. I weary with my moaning. Every night I flood my bed with tears. I drench my couch with my weeping. Psalm 6. O God, do not be far from me. O my God, make haste to help me. Psalm 71. So, again, I'll close with a Psalm 74, which is really a plea for help in a time of national humiliation. So to pray with this psalm and then to close with a collect, a prayer in this time. And I just encourage all of us to somehow get in touch with lamentation in our world and in ourselves. And in that, God will liberate us and help us to learn to listen to one another and to hear and to cry out for God. So let this Psalm 74 be our prayer of lamentation. O God, why do you cast us off forever? What does your anger smoke against the sheep of your pasture? Remember your congregation which you acquired long ago, which you redeemed to be the tribe of your heritage. Remember Mount Zion, where you came to dwell. Direct your steps to the perpetual ruins. The enemy has destroyed everything in the sanctuary. Your foes have roared within your holy place. They set up their emblems there. At the upper entrances, they hack the wood trellis with axes, and then with the hatchets and hammers, they smashed all its carved wood. They set your sanctuary on fire. They desecrated the dwelling place of your name, bringing it to the ground. They said to themselves, we will truly subdue them. They burned all the meeting places of God in the land. We do not see our emblems. There is no longer any prophet, and there is no one among us who knows how long. How long, O God, is the foe to scoff? Is the enemy to revile your name forever? Why do you hold back your hand? Why do you keep your hand in your bosom? Yet God, my King, is from of old, working salvation in the earth. You divided the sea by your might. You broke the heads of the dragons in the waters. You crushed the heads of the Leviathan. You gave him as food for the creatures of the wilderness. You cut openings for springs and torrents. You dried up ever-flowing streams. Yours is the day, yours also the night. You established the luminaries and the sun. You have fixed all the bounds of the earth. You made summer and winter. Remember this, O Lord, how the enemy scoffs and an impious people reviles your name. Do not deliver the soul of your dove to the wild animals. Do not forget the life of your poor forever. Have regard for your covenant, for the dark places of the land are full of the haunts of violence. Do not let the downtrodden be put to shame. Let the poor and the needy praise your name. Rise up, O God. Plead your cause. Remember how the impious scoff at you all day long. Do not forget the clamor of your foes, the uproar of your adversaries that goes up continually. Just live in that wound. Let God tend to us in those words. Let us pray. Loving God and Jesus, you were bullied, beaten, and killed. You are always on the side of those whose souls or bodies are mistreated. While I cannot be present with my body at the protests right now, I stand with all those who stand up for justice. Uphold them, keep them safe. Grant us the courage to stand beside all who are harmed by the violence of racism with our bodies and in our prayers. Give us the words to speak out for those whose breath has been taken. Enkindle in our hearts the fire of your love, that together we might end the scourge of racism that has infected our nation. Let our lament and our cry connect us to all those who cry and lament.